guess balance is a totally useless spec in ref. Anyway, let's dive into my guide. But before we do that, if there is a guide you would like to see, make sure to drop a comment down below. First, we will cover the basics such as gear, which trinket you should using, talents, glyphs, and then move on to rotation and how to burst effectively. After that, we will talk about the actual role of balance in arena, which comps works best for Balance Druid and which ones are worth trying out. That's part 1. In part 2, we will cover how to actually be the best Balance Druid on the server, things like mastering the knockbacks mechanic, timing your crowns correctly, and the extra tips and tricks that almost no Balance Druids are using it. At least not in this way. So stay tuned. When talking about Balance Druids, we should separate into two builds. The first is the Haze Crit build and the second is the Spirit Haze build. Let's take a look at the advantage and disadvantage of each. Let's start with the Haze Crit build. This usually comes with a tier 10 2/5 set bonus, which gives you a proc that increases your burst and overall damage. This is going to be your main advantage. Additionally, the more crit you have, the higher chance you trigger the Nature's Grace talent, which increases your casting speed and your global CD as well. On the other hand, the main issue is the mana. With this build, you can very quickly, so it's not ideal for comps that take time to finish like Frost Mage, Balance, Infuse. It's also less effective in dampening comps in freeze, such as Balance plus Affliction plus Healer, like Restore Shaman and Holy Paladin, where the focus is on the constant dot pressure to the enemy team rather than relying on burst damage. Next, let's take a look at the Spirit Haze build. One of the biggest advantages of this build is that it solves the mana problem. With Spirit Haze, you rarely get wound. For longer games, this is so much better because you don't have to worry about running out of mana or constantly searching for drinks, which can be dreadful sometimes. You will also see in the gear section that this build makes you much tankier. Another important point is how your damage works with this build. With a talent called Improve Moonking form, 30% of your spirit is converted into spell damage. This increases your dot and star for damage over time, allowing you to apply constant pressure by managing your mana. The downside is that you will have fewer Nature's Grace proc and no strong burst procs, so overall burst will be lower than the Haze Crit build. Let's move on the gear section of the video. I'm going to show the recommended gear for both the Haze Crit and the Spirit Haze builds. We also cover the key stat priorities like hit and spell penetration caps and finish with the trinkets. First, I'm going to show the Haze Crit gear setup. As you can see, I'm using the tier 10 head at chest, but for the best in slot, you should swap the chest for the shoulders. That way, you will lose less resilience. I'm just running with the chest because honestly, I'm too lazy to farm the shoulders. The rest of the gear is basically red off pieces and set pieces focused on crit chance. And for both Idol and Trinket, I recommend the Crit Idol together with Phylactery to really maximize your damage. Feel free to pause the video to check out the enchants and gems. In general, you want to stack as much resilience as possible. Thanks to the balance of power talent, you basically get the hit cap you need. Technically, because of Glyphs and Bash, you will want a tiny bit more hit, but you can easily pick up from either the Relentless Gladiator ring or the Ashen Vertic Reputation ring from Ice Crown Citadel. As for spell penetration, against mages, elemental shaman, and sometimes hunters, due to mage armor, nature resistant totem, or aspect of the wild, you will need at least 130 spell penetration to avoid resist. For a softer cap, I recommend using 50 to 70 since you can always switch your offhand from haste to spell penetration if you need to reach the full cap. Against druids, I would also recommend at least 75 spell penetration. Again, you can do this with the offhand swap to avoid resist. As you can see, with this build, you should aim for around 1.3 to 1.4k resilience depending on your professions. Let's switch to the Spirit Haze build. Here, we are going to use the 2/5 resilience streak, just like the elemental shamans do. Basically, it means you will need 2 pieces from the balance set and at least 2 spirit pieces from the Restore Druid set. The Redful 2/5 set bonus gives you extra 100 resilience and 29 spell power. So with this setup, you gain an extra 100 resilience. Once you get a bit more geared, I would recommend using the Spirit Haze PvE legs as well. For the 2.5 balance set, you should go with the shoulders and hands since they provide less spirit compared to the head, chest or legs. The rest is basically Spirit Haze off pieces such as the PvE belt. Hit and spell penetration caps are the same here. Once you reach the spell penetration cap, feel free to jam for mana regen, spirit, or stamina in your blue slots. It literally comes down to your own preference. As you can see, with this build, you should aim for around 1.4 to 1.5k resilience depending on your professions. You might ask, what about the balance 4/5 set bonus? Well, in the current meta, it really doesn't bring much value compared to other two options. The main issue is that it only procs from Wrathcast, and for balance, that's just not ideal. On the other hand, the tier 10 2/5 bonus procs much more frequently and gives you way more benefit overall. Back in the day, a lot of players like to run crit haze off pieces instead of tier 10, but the issue is basically the same. You should either go for the damage and stronger burst with tier 10, or focus on mana sustain and play longer games as more of a support. Let's talk about Trinkets. For 2v2, you can choose in between 4, and for 3v3, you can choose in between 3 Trinkets. Starting with the 2v2, the order looks like this: Bubble, Fila, Solace, and CTS. With most comps, you will need Bubble just to survive against classes like Warlocks, DKs, Rogues, and so on. Unless your teammate is a Rogue, like in a Balance Druid 2v2 comp, in which case you might swap to DPS Trinket like Phylactery. The second best option are either Phylactery for extra burst damage or Solace for mana management. And then there is CTS. Now, CTS does give you more haste, which is amazing for balance, but the proc just isn't strong enough. When it comes about burst, you want raw numbers. Fila gives you approximately 1.2k spell power, while CTS only gives you 861. The difference is massive. Sure, you could argue that extra haste makes it easier to land cyclones, roots, hibernates, or any other damager CC cast, and that's true, which is why I would say CTS is playable, but far from the best choice. For 3v3, in order is almost the same. Fila into Solace into CTS. It really depends on what comp you're running. That said, I've seen some balanced players run Fila plus CTS at the same time, so no medallion trinket. And yes, the damage is insane, but the moment you face a rogue, a warlock, or any setup heavy comp, you're basically griefing your team. Go ahead and try it if you want to speedrun losing MMR, and I've seen so many druid throws games like this. Unless your goal is to get framed by your teammates, I wouldn't recommend it. And finally, let's finish off with professions. Honestly, I don't think they make a huge difference. I personally running jewel crafting and engineering on most of my classes, though I'm thinking about trying tailoring as well, since it gives a really nice spell power buff. So for balance, you can pick in between jewel crafting, blacksmithing, engineering or tailoring, or basically whatever you want. Talents. I will show you what I'm currently using for crit haste and spirit haste build. As you can see, the two are almost identical. The yellow highlights shows alternatives you can choose from. For example, since it's classic, there isn't really a best talent build for Balance Druid. There are multiple viable options. In 2v2, you won't cast that often, so the Eclipse talent won't be very effective. Instead of that, you might want to put points into mana or healing talents like Genesis or improve rejuvenation. But in 3v3, Eclipse should usually be picked because there are comps when you can actually free cast a lot. That talent will increase your Wrath and Starfire damage significantly. Feel free to adjust and make your own build following these general rules. For Glyphs, I think 2 out of 3 should be Glyphs of Starfall and Glyphs of Insect Swarm. The third one is up to you. I recommend using Glyphs of Monsoon since your knockback ability, aka the Typhoon, will be one of your key tools for making big plays, interrupting targets, or just kiting more effectively. If you are struggling with mana, you can use Glyphs of Innervate, or if you feel especially squishy, Glyphs of Barskin might be your optimal choice. I also want to mention interesting glyphs that's usually not considered the best, but can be extremely strong in certain comps or duels, especially with melee. Glyphs of Focus. It increases your Starfall damage by 10% and it scales with your other procs. But it also reduces the radius of Starfire by 50%. This makes your Starfire almost mid-range. For example, with a rogue, these grips can give you extra burst damage you need to win a game or help you avoid breaking CCs like Blind, Sap, or Gouge. On the other hand, that grips is really bad with something like an Affliction Warlock where you need a distance and more importantly, AoE damage. As a side note, in 2v2, you can also try healing grips such as Glyphs of Rejuvenation or Glyphs of Rapid Rejuvenation. Combined with the Improved Rejuvenation talent, this can squeeze out extra healing if your comp needs it. It's not something I usually run, but it has its place in the right setup. Your basic rotation is pretty easy. Apply your 2 dots and the debuff called Earth and Moon, which is increased spell damage taken by 12%. This effect is similar to the Warlock spell Curse of the Elements. You can apply the debuff either with Wrath or Starfire. If you have free cast, feel free to use Max Strength Wrath or Starfire, but if they're focusing on interrupting you, you can use Rank from Wrath just to keep the debuff up. In 3v3, you will most likely play with Eclipse talent. What this does is if you crit with Wrath, you will get a Lunar Eclipse buff, which increases your Starfire crit chance for 15 seconds. Once that expires, if you crit with Starfire, you will get a Solar Eclipse buff, which increases your Wrath damage for 15 seconds. You need both to reset the cycle, so for example, you can get Lunar Eclipse twice in a row without also getting a solar one. As for rotation, you need to pay attention to this cycle to maximize your damage. This talent really shines with spell cleaves where you are more likely to free cast. As a Balance Druid, especially at higher rating, you need to learn how to fake cast. Otherwise, it will be really hard to land CCs. But for lower rated games, while you are learning, you can bait interrupts with Starfire. It hits really hard, but also has a long cast time, so if they waste a kick on it, you can safely cast clones, roots, or even heal. It's also important to talk about Wrath versus Moonfire. Wrath won't hit that hard unless you have the Solar Eclipse buff. Spamming Wrath outside of Eclipse can be a bait, even if it does slightly more damage than Moonfire spam. So why would you sometimes use Moonfire instead of Wrath? Here's the thing. Let's say you are facing a Thundercleave, Arms Warrior, Elemental Shaman, Holy Paladin. Against this comp, it's super hard to get cast off because of warrior pressure plus interrupts like wind shear, grounding totem, spell reflection, and knockbacks. In that case, spamming Moonfire for direct damage is more reliable. That gives you higher chance to crit, proc Nature Grace, and keep spamming, create more pressure overall. And the best part, you don't have to worry about interrupts. You can just spam one button and still do solid pressure. So to summarize, your main goal is to keep your 2 dots up and maintain Earth and Moon debuff with Wrath or Starfire. In Freeze, play around Eclipse talent cycle, Wrath to Starfire Eclipse, Starfire to Wrath Eclipse. If you are getting locked down with interrupts, switch to Moonfire spam to keep pressure rolling. In the next section, we will talk about your main burst ability, Starfall, and overall role of balance in Arena. As for bursts, first, let's talk about the ideal way to do it. You want to have as many procs as possible at the same time, and only then should you press Starfall. Starfall is a key to winning a game, even if you are playing a dampening or a setup based comp. So, what procs are we talking about? We are talking about Phylactery or other trinket procs, tier 10 set bonus proc, Nature's Grace proc, Ashen Ring, Frenzy proc, and Engineering or Tailoring procs if you have them. But let's be real, you most likely won't have all of these procs at once, maybe for opener, but definitely not during the whole match. So the goal is to gather as many procs as you reasonably can before launching your burst. In reality, it depends on situation and your comp as well. If you are playing a setup comp like Balance Rogue or Balance Log, you often have to press burst whenever you can set it up cleanly, even if you don't have every proc, because a clean setup is more important than waiting for all of your procs. With comps like Shadow Priest or Affliction Warlock, you should try to stack up more procs before bursting, since you will be the main damage and burst dealer in those comps. Try not to break CCs like Blind or Shift with it. The best play is to cycle off targets before you pop Starfall. Balance roll. Balance is at its core a support spec. By support, I mean spec that aren't there to carry games on raw damage or pure healing, but to make their teammates shine. Think of like Prague Paladins with the instant heals and sacrifices, Frost Mages with the endless CC chains, or Elemental Shamans with roots, interrupts, and heals. Balance fits right into this category. You bring strong healing, multiple CC tools like Cyclone Roots Hibernate, consistent dot pressure, and burst with Starfall. But your overall damage outside your Starfall isn't game breaking. So your role as a balance is support, but how to play that role shift depending on whether you are in 2v2 or 3v3 arena. In 2v2, you'll be often playing similar to Resto Druid with a Starfall and Typhon in your back pocket. Focus on healing and CC to keep yourself and your teammate alive while maintaining dots for consistent pressure. Damage is still important, but keeping your teammate alive and controlling the fight is what really wins the game. In 3v3, healing takes a backseat. Your primary focus is constant damage and CC to maintain pressure and control. There are situations where you will need to press heals, but only when absolutely necessary because it can backfire easily. Once you start healing, your pressure drops, you lose control of the fight, and you become vulnerable if the enemy switches on you. Outside of your Moonkin form, you are extremely squishy, so try to avoid acting like a pocket healer. Typhoon is one of the key abilities in both 2v2 and 3v3 arenas. We will dive deeper in the usage in part 2 because there's a lot you can do with it, like interrupting key casts, breaking CC, or saving yourself in clutch moments. And lastly, the tier list. In the last section, we're going to talk about the 2v2 and 3v3 comps. I will make a tier list for both of them. Let's start with the 2v2 comps. Note, since almost nobody is playing 200 red in 2v2 anymore, red will symbolize a Prague Paladin here, S tier. For me, the two best comps for balance in 2v2 are Balance Subrogue and Balance Prague Paladin. Balance Sub has always been a classic. They complement each other perfectly. Both have stealth, Balance brings massive off heals so you can reset fights, and the burst line up on the same 1 minute cooldown. On the other hand, Balance Prague works because Prague makes almost any spec playable. I feel like Balance Prague is pretty similar to Demo Prague in terms of offense. In a Hodge combo, you can usually force major cooldowns or even close out the games. If you're new to Balance, this is probably the easiest comp to start with, A tier. These are the comps that work really well with Balance in 2v2. Most of them are already represented by other players, though a couple might surprise you. Balance MM Hunter. Shockingly strong, Balance's biggest weakness in Tooth is getting run over by rogue comps like SPR, DPR, or Ferrarok. With Hunter, you have Road of Sacrifice to save you against those comps. And Balance, you can have land traps with cross CC like clones, roots, or stuns. Balance Warrior. Works kind of like Resto Druid arms, which in my opinion is just a bit stronger overall. Balance has an advantage too. With Typhon, you can break CC, Kai better, and even knock players down in certain arenas. Once you get experience as Balance, you can definitely push rating with this comp. Balance Destro. This comp is good, but with a healer, it's overall better. Destro can easily set up constant WCCs, so as a Balance you will most likely have an easier time. Balance Frost Mage. Both specs lean toward support and have insane control, so we often dominate the pace of the game. The downside, it's hard to finish games, but it's stronger than a lot of other balance comps. Balance Elemental Shaman. Feels like a bait. Burst is weak, control is lacking, but defensively it's very strong. And I can say balance from rogues with heals and totems, which is why I will keep it in A tier. But personally, I think it belongs in B tier. Playable, but you will likely to struggle more than higher tier options. Worth trying if you enjoy experimenting. Balance Demo or Epilogue. Both are squishier than Distro. Probably you should play with Succubus for double CC similar to Distrolog, even though it's kinda stinky. F3 is strong in longer games because it has Dispel protection, allowing you to dampen almost any comp. Demo's Metamorphosis and Starfall combo also lethal. Balance Arsa weaker version of a sub-rogues. Requires good synergy and coordination. If your partner is Asa, give it a try, but sub is usually better. Balance Healers. Holy Paladin provides you bob against melees and makes you the tankiest comp in the healer balance setup. Holy Paladin has Hodge, and similar to Prac Paladin, you can finish games or force major cooldowns. Disc can run a Mana Burn style similar to Disc Frost Mage with strong CC to support Mana Burn setups, though this is the worst version of it. Resto Shaman can give you Bloodlust, which can be devastating if timed correctly. Balance Prot Warrior. This is a comp I really want to try out because Prot brings incredible control, and in terms of gameplay, it's similar to ARM's Resto Druid. Prot Resto Druid is overall stronger, but the Balance version is definitely playable, making it a high B tier. C tier. These are comps that aren't great, but if there would be a 2v2 solo shuffle, you could still pull out some wins. They are generally situational or harder to execute consistently. Balance Unholy Decay can be tanky, especially with Anti-Magic Zone, but those two specs doesn't really fit together outside of the spread dot damage. Balance Shadow Priest. Similar to Balance Unholy Decay, good spread dot damage. Shadow Priest can provide heals and extra CCs, but overall the specs doesn't really synergize well. Balance Arcane or Fire Mage. Basically a worse version of a Balance Frost Mage. Less control, more squishier, harder to finish games. And lastly, Balance Combat Rogues. Somewhat playable in 2v2, but overall not very strong. D tier. These are comps I wouldn't recommend for rating. They are either super weak specs that nobody plays or just have basically zero chance to push rating. And lastly, the 3v3 tier list. Let's start with the S tier. Balance, Lock, and Healer. One of the best comps for Balance POV. Every spec here deserves S tier. Maybe I'm biased about Demo, but it is what it is. With Distro Balance, you can burst down anybody with good coordination. With F3, you can dampen almost everyone. Demo works similar to Distro, and with Metamorphosis plus Starfall, both AoE and single target damage hit super hard. For Demo, Balance is definitely the go-to partner in 3v3. Balance Rogue Healer. Similar to 2v2, the burst lines up perfectly. The stat opener fits flawlessly, everything works together. As for healers, Holy Paladin is the best healer in the game. Provides unmatchable utility like Sacrifice, Bob, Aura Mastery and Freedom, making you and your teammate extremely tanky and versatile. Resto Shaman offers Bloodlust, which is super strong in 3v3, especially with caster Glyphs. The rest of the tier list is more about solo queue or solo shuffle experiments. Which comps give you headaches and which comps work well in solo queue. A tier. Balance, Paladin, X. Both Paladin specs at tankiness. With a good Hodge, you can finish games, but make sure to follow it up with CCs like Cyclone, Roots, or Hibernate. The best healer for this comp is this Priest. Balance, Elemental Shaman, X. Decent in 3v3, especially maps like Blade Edge or Daran Arena. The knockbacks works really well against melees, but this comp is weaker against caster Glyphs. Balance Arms Warrior X. Arms Warrior brings constant pressure and works really well with support specs, just like with Mage or Elemental Shaman. The carry from Warrior combined with the control from support specs makes this comp very strong. And lastly, Balance Hunter X. Similar to 2v2, these two specs support each other with defensive abilities and CC to control the game. The multi-stack effect adds constant pressure and reduces enemy healing, making it easier to control the game. B tier. Playable in solo queue, but not optimal for rating. Balance Asarok Healer. Worst version of a sub-rogue. Better for dispel protection, but generally much weaker though playable in solo queue. Balance DK or Balance Shadow Priest something. A really good spread dot damage, but worse than playing with Affliction Lock. Balance Prot X. Although I haven't played this much, without multi-strike it's not that strong overall. C tier. In the C tier I put specs which appears in solo queue and you have a chance to win a game, but oh boy. And last the D tier. These comps are not represented at all in solo queue or 3v3 arena. Super weak specs or those with basically zero chance to push ratings. Yes, BM Hunter can appear, but only paired with Enha Shaman. Thanks for watching. If you wanna support me, make sure to subscribe. Also, if you want to see any other guides or videos, comment it down. And see ya in the next one.